Tonight, I want you to stand in a stone courtyard, feel the cold chains on your wrists, smell the smoke drifting through a Roman dawn, hear the murmurs of a crowd that came not to praise you, but to watch you burn. His name was Giordano Bruno, monk, philosopher, heretic, a man who refused to cage the stars inside the walls of Scripture, who dared to say the universe was infinite, that worlds spun beyond worlds, and that truth could not be chained by fear. Some called him a fool, some called him possessed, some, centuries later, called him a martyr for free thought. Tonight, we walk through cloisters and secret libraries, through prison cells and pyres, to meet a man who saw infinity and paid for it with fire. This is Faces of History. I'm the Duke of New York, and tonight, we light the torch for Giordano Bruno. Before the chains, before the stake, before the burning pyre that scorched his name into the pages of forbidden books, there was just a boy with sharp eyes and an appetite for questions bigger than any priest's answer. Filippo Bruno, that's the name his mother whispered when she held him for the first time in 1548. He was born in Nola, a modest town perched near Naples, where the fields rolled green under the sun and the old Roman stones whispered forgotten secrets. Nola was no Renaissance city like Florence or Venice. It was a crossroads, a town of peasants, priests, and the lingering shadow of Spanish rule. By the time young Filippo could walk its narrow lanes, he would have seen soldiers swagger through the market in shining breastplates, their boots caked in the dust of empire. His father, Giovanni Bruno, was a soldier too, a man of modest means and little patience for a son whose eyes stayed buried in books longer than they ever did on a plow or a sword. His mother, Frau Lisa Savellino, was the softer voice, urging the boy toward the church, hoping faith might make him safe in a world where asking the wrong question could cost your head. As a boy, Filippo did not run from questions. He chased them. He learned his letters at the local school, then devoured the classics: Homer, Aristotle, Plato. He recited psalms by day and puzzled over paradoxes by night. At 15, an age when most boys in Nola were apprenticed to cobblers, farmers, or their father's trade, Filippo chose another path: the black and white robes of the Dominican order. He entered the monastery of San Domenico Maggiore in Naples, a vast stone fortress of faith, books, and whispered debate. There, the boy from the fields of Nola became Brother Giordano, a name chosen to honor Giordano Crispo, an older Dominican who inspired him to live by the mind as much as by the rosary. Inside those cold cloisters, the young monk found a strange freedom. The Dominicans prized scholarship, logic, philosophy, the art of memory. By day, Giordano chanted the Mass, served at the altar, and confessed his soul to his superiors. By night, he read anything he could find, and plenty he was told never to touch. The monastery library became his galaxy. There were ancient manuscripts smuggled from Byzantium, Greek philosophers whose ideas the church kept close, wary of the shadows they cast on dogma. There were rumors, books from Erasmus, the biting wit of Rabelais, the strange, dizzying heliocentric scribbles of Copernicus that said, maybe the earth is not the center of all things. Giordano was fascinated by the works of Ramon Llull, a mystic who dreamed of unlocking the secrets of the universe through combinations of symbols and logic wheels. Llull's art of memory, a system to remember and connect all knowledge, sank deep into the young monk's bones. He trained his mind like a muscle. They say he could recite entire books by heart. He could stand before a crowded cloister and recall whole passages of scripture, Aristotle, and ancient poetry, word for word. Memory was his magic, his shield, and his sword. But the sharper his mind grew, the more it chafed at the tight collar of orthodoxy. He asked too many questions of his brothers. Why must the earth stand still? Why should the heavens be perfect and finite when our thoughts push outward forever? Why should man's soul be the only thing with no edge, no boundary, when the church insists the cosmos itself is boxed in like a prison cell? By his 20s, rumors began to curl around Brother Giordano like smoke. He removed the holy images from his cell, an act of defiance to the Dominican eyes that watched for any whiff of heresy. He read Erasmus out in the open. He spoke boldly of the ideas of ancient heretics, men the Inquisition had long buried under fire and ash. They summoned him for questioning. They whispered, apostate, dangerous. They told him to confess, to recant his reckless reading. But the boy from Nola, who had run his fingertips across parchment older than kingdoms, refused to muzzle his mind. And so, like a comet with too much fire to stay inside any sphere, Giordano Bruno fled. He slipped from the monastery's stone walls and stepped out into a Europe where asking the wrong question could set a man's world alight, but where, for the briefest moment, he was free to ask them all. He was no longer Brother Giordano, just Giordano Bruno, philosopher, wanderer, heretic in the making. The boy from Nola who had dared to read forbidden books would become the man who dreamed of infinite stars and the man who'd meet fire for daring to say so out loud. When Giordano Bruno slipped out of the Dominican cloister in Naples, he wasn't just running from monks. He was running from the steel jaws of the Holy Inquisition. The Europe he stepped into was not a gentle continent. It was an armed map of suspicion and fire, where kings sharpened swords for holy wars and priests sharpened questions for dark cells beneath cathedrals. In 1576, Bruno was 28 years old, brilliant, brash, and homeless. He dressed now not in a monk's robes, but in the plain garb of a scholar for hire. His head held more dangerous cargo than any ship that crossed the Mediterranean, ideas that could fracture the world as men knew it. He drifted north, Geneva first, where Calvin's city prided itself on order and stern Protestant virtue. Surely, Bruno thought, this new world of Reformation would welcome a mind that refused to kneel to Rome. He was wrong. In Geneva, Bruno found work as a proofreader. He hoped for debate, for free thought, for open talk of Copernicus and infinity. Instead, he found cold suspicion. He quarreled with professors who clung to Aristotle's tight, closed universe like a drowning man clings to driftwood. When they mocked him, he mocked back, too sharp, too quick with insult. Bruno's tongue could flay a fool in Latin or Italian, sometimes both in the same breath. Soon the city's ministers turned on him. They tossed him in prison for slander. In Geneva, the same thought police wore a different cross, but they still carried the keys to a cell. Bruno paid bail. He slipped out again, Geneva shrinking in the distance behind him. The exile learned his first lesson. There is no safe city for a man who will not hush his mind. France in the 1580s was a tinderbox of Catholics and Huguenots tearing at each other's throats. But for a bold mind and a quick tongue, there were always doors to knock on. In Paris, Bruno found his audience, curious nobles, restless students, professors hungry for something more than dry Aristotle. They gathered in halls to hear him lecture on the art of memory, his mental wheels and symbols that could store whole libraries in the mind's dark attic. To many, he was a wonder. He could stand for hours, mapping out his labyrinth of thoughts, geometry, astrology, ancient magic, woven into the new mathematics of Copernicus. To others, he was dangerous, an Italian stranger mixing pagan symbols with the holy mysteries, hinting that the universe itself was alive with sparks of divinity, that souls might migrate from star to star in a cosmic dance older than Genesis. Word of this brazen Neapolitan reached King Henry III. France's young monarch had an eye for novelty, a court that glittered with artists, poets, alchemists. Henry summoned Bruno, curious to see this wandering heretic who claimed the mind could be trained like a knight's arm. Bruno dazzled him. He demonstrated feats of memory that turned courtiers' eyes wide with wonder. He spoke of an infinite cosmos, a realm where the divine spark scattered endlessly among stars, each sun a lantern in God's limitless cathedral. Henry gave him patronage, a slim shield against the dogs of orthodoxy. For a time, Bruno lectured freely in Paris, published books, debated logic and astronomy with France's best minds. But Paris, too, had limits. Bruno mocked professors. He baited theologians. He hinted that Christ was divine, but so too was every living thing, every burning star, every mind that dared to reach beyond dogma. Each word carved another notch in the scaffold waiting for him. England came next. In 1583, Bruno crossed the Channel to Elizabeth's island kingdom. England, where Protestants and Catholics danced the blade's edge daily, where spies and exiles traded secrets in alehouses and royal gardens. Bruno made for Oxford, the oldest nest of English learning. He expected sharp minds. What he found was old men clutching Aristotle like a crucifix, refusing Copernicus like poison. He lectured anyway, boldly, brilliantly, telling Oxford's dons they were blind to the true heavens. He mocked their stale logic, accused them of chaining reason to dogma. The dons bristled. They hissed him out of their colleges. But London offered new stages. Here Bruno mingled with courtiers, playwrights, secret societies who whispered of hermetic magic, secret codes, cosmic mind. Some say he crossed paths with John Dee, Elizabeth's own magician, though the archives keep that secret locked in rumor. Here he wrote and published The Ash Wednesday Supper, The Expulsion of the Triumphant Beast, books cloaked as dialogues, crackling with insult and hidden heresies. He said the universe was alive. He said religion had caged the divine spark. He said truth was bigger than any pulpit dared speak. But even England, a land of spies and exiles, grew tired of Bruno's tongue. Patronage thinned, enemies thickened. So he drifted again. Wittenberg, Prague, Helmstedt, Frankfurt, always moving, always teaching, writing, debating. In every city he found open doors and slammed ones. Some welcomed his genius, his memory tricks, his bold talk of the universe with no walls. Others whispered heretic, madman, sorcerer. He spoke Latin in taverns by candlelight. He debated scholars until they fled the table red-faced. He scribbled fresh pages that sailed like sparks through Europe, pages the censors hunted and burned even as they spread. A cold wind through an open window, a single candle guttering. For 15 restless years, Bruno roamed like a mind without a home. He could have bent the knee, he could have trimmed his words, taught his memory arts, kept his astronomy polite, but the boy from Nola, the exile with too many stars in his skull, refused to cage infinity to please the priests of any city. He stayed on the run. He stayed stubborn. He stayed dangerous. And one winter night in Venice, a locked door, a fearful patron, and the claws of the Inquisition would snap shut at last. By the time Giordano Bruno crossed into his 40s, he had worn out more cities than a rogue diplomat. He'd survived prison in Geneva, slander in Oxford, and polite snubs in Parisian salons. But there was something about him that kings, nobles, and scholars just couldn't resist, at least for a while. Bruno was more than a drifter whispering scandalous astronomy. He was a showman, a man whose mind was a theater, whose tongue flicked words like blades. When he rose to lecture, candles flickered, students leaned forward, and enemies sharpened their knives behind closed doors. He was a star in royal courts hungry for novelty. In Paris, he dazzled King Henry III, a monarch who kept poets, painters, and astrologers like precious curious. Bruno entertained him with feats of prodigious memory. Entire passages recited backwards and forwards. Aristotle's dense lines turned into spinning wheels of symbolic code. Lessons on the art of imprinting ideas so deep in the mind, they never slipped away. But Bruno didn't stop at memory. He weaved magic into logic, old hermetic secrets he claimed went back to the ancient Egyptians. He taught that the universe wasn't dead stone and cold fire. It was alive, shot through with a universal soul. Each star, each planet, each spark of thought was part of an infinite whole. Divine, breathing, unbounded. The hush of a university hall, nervous coughs, a single voice echoing off vaulted ceilings. In Oxford, he strode into colleges older than the nations that paid their bills. He took the stage in his Italian cloak and tore into their stale Aristotle. He declared Copernicus right. The earth moved. The stars were suns. Other worlds spun unseen in the night sky. And then, the twist that froze every dean's polite smile, he argued that scripture could not muzzle science. The professors hissed, the students gossiped, the English scholars shooed him from the lectern, then mocked him behind locked doors. Bruno called them donkeys in Latin and left them with a curse. May your universe stay small and your minds even smaller. In London, he mingled with a stranger circle. Secret societies of magicians, alchemists, men who called themselves Rosicrucians before the world knew the name. They passed coded letters, debated lost books of Hermes Trismegistus, and whispered of a new dawn, a renaissance not just of art, but of hidden knowledge. Bruno listened, talked, hinted at truth so dangerous that even England's spy masters pricked up their ears. He published wild, fiery dialogues that danced between science, satire, and forbidden faith. The Ash Wednesday Supper ridiculed Oxford's dons and their stale cosmology. The expulsion of the triumphant beast tore through Christian orthodoxy like a fox through a chicken coop, mocking the corrupt trappings of ritual while praising a divine spark bigger than any cathedral could hold. Bruno was not careful with his words. He stabbed with them, laughed with them, hurled them like stones through stained glass. He called out cowardly philosophers who recited Aristotle line by line but never looked up at the stars for themselves. He baited theologians who clung to doctrines like iron chains. He claimed the soul of man might move through infinite worlds, reborn under endless stars. He hinted that Christ's divinity might be just one spark of an endless divine mind, a cosmic ocean that spilled far beyond Jerusalem's hills. To his patrons, this was dazzling, scandalous entertainment. For a restless court, his heresy was a parlor trick, a dangerous game they could enjoy behind locked doors while the old church watched from Rome with suspicion sharpening its blade. But kings and dukes are practical creatures. They love a clever heretic until he threatens their power. Bruno's bold tongue could please them one night and terrify them the next. By the late 1580s, Bruno's name was known from London to Prague, but his safe places were shrinking. Protestant cities distrusted his mystical side. Catholic strongholds saw a wolf in monk's clothing. The memory master was running out of sympathetic ears. Yet Bruno didn't bend. He wouldn't dilute his infinity to fit inside any ruler's Bible. He wouldn't stay politely silent so that Oxford professors could bask in Aristotle's safe, finite stars. He wouldn't hush his lips so that French bishops could sleep without nightmares of countless worlds spinning where the Bible said there was only one. And so the philosopher who could mesmerize kings became a man without a home. Courts that once toasted him now sent polite letters saying, "Perhaps, dear Giordano, you should move along before the guards come asking awkward questions." And move along he did, from royal halls to rented rooms, from candlelit debates to bitter exiles. He was free in the only way a heretic ever is, hunted, poor, and brilliant. But even Bruno needed shelter. And when an eager Venetian nobleman invited him to teach his private art of memory in the Republic's gleaming canals, the restless mind took the bait. Venice would not be his sanctuary. It would be his trap. A mind as bright as the stars he claimed spun endlessly above our heads, about to collide with a cell, a trial, and a pyre waiting for dry wood in the Campo de' Fiori. Because when you chase truth too far from the safety of candles and closed books, you find out what fire really means. Venice, the city of mirrors and masks, of hidden whispers and open secrets. For centuries, rebels and outcasts found sanctuary here, tucked between salt marshes and the Adriatic Sea, a republic where merchants traded gold by day and rumors by night. And so in 1591, Giordano Bruno arrived, weary from his restless pilgrimage across a continent that no longer wanted him but could not look away. He came with a letter of invitation, the promise of shelter and coin from a wealthy Venetian nobleman, Giovanni Mocenigo. Mocenigo was no king or scholar, just a bored, ambitious man who fancied himself a seeker of hidden truths. He had heard of Bruno's legendary arts, the tricks of the memory wheel, the secrets that let a man recall every page of Aristotle by heart, the whispered powers that could bend mind and matter if only one learned the right words. Mocenigo wanted what every petty noble wanted, an edge, knowledge wrapped in secrecy, a whiff of forbidden power to make him bigger than his neighbors. And Bruno, tired, hungry, maybe a little desperate, agreed. For a while it seemed safe. Bruno set up shop in Mocenigo's fine palazzo, a bright mind imprisoned in silk drapes and high ceilings. He gave lectures on the art of memory, scribbled fresh pages of philosophy no printer dared touch, mapped his infinite universe on wax tablets while Mocenigo hovered at his shoulder, eyes wide with half-understood awe. But Mocenigo was no Copernican dreamer. He was a small man with a small mind cracking under the weight of the heresies whispered into his ear. Bruno talked too freely. He spoke not only of memory, but of stars that defied the church's tight map of heaven, of an infinite cosmos teeming with souls that drifted from world to world like sparks in the night. He hinted that religion was a cage men built to hide from the vast, dark truth of the universe. To Bruno, it was cosmic poetry. To Mocenigo, it was treasonous poison. Mocenigo's mind began to split, fear eating at his curiosity. What if his guest was not a philosopher but a sorcerer? What if his art of memory was black magic that could damn Mocenigo's soul to eternal flames? What if the Inquisition knocked at his door and found him harboring a notorious heretic? The Venetian Republic was freer than Rome, but not free enough to protect a man who laughed at saints and multiplied worlds like coins from a magician's sleeve. And so, one night in May 1592, Mocenigo made his move. He locked the doors of the palazzo. Bruno found himself a guest turned prisoner, his patron now a captor. Outside, Mocenigo's servants crept through dark alleys to summon the Inquisition's officers. When they arrived, they dragged Bruno from his chamber, ink stains still fresh on his fingertips, books scattered on the table, his universe torn from parchment and flung into a cold cell. In Venice, they questioned him first. They drew up charges like kindling, blasphemy, heresy, the denial of Christ's divinity, the claim that the universe was infinite, a direct insult to the tight, cozy heavens of Genesis. Bruno argued with them. He spun logic like a sword. He insisted he was no magician, just a philosopher, a teacher, a seeker of truths too big for dusty libraries. He pointed to Copernicus, to the ancient Greeks, to Scripture itself, or his version of it. Venetian inquisitors, famously independent, weighed the risk. They liked their power local, their intrigues subtle. They might have let him go, might have sent him packing to some fresh exile in the Protestant North where he could talk of spinning worlds to Lutheran rebels instead. But Rome wanted him. The Roman Inquisition, with its teeth and chains and taste for show trials, sent word, "Send us the heretic. We will deal with him properly." Venice, the Republic of Masks and Markets, sold him out to keep its trade routes open and its papal blessings secure. And so Giordano Bruno, the boy from Nola, the Dominican runaway, the wandering philosopher who insulted kings and professors alike, was chained and carted across the Apennines through guarded roads and secret back gates, back into the belly of the beast he had escaped 2 decades before. He had spent 15 years running from this moment. Now the flight was over. 7 years in Rome would follow. 7 years of cold cells, endless interrogations, scribes scratching confessions that never came. 7 years in which the stars Bruno loved so dearly would vanish behind stone walls and torch smoke. They offered him chance after chance. Recant, deny your infinity, confess your magic, swallow your universe and spit out the official truth. But if you've learned anything tonight, you know Giordano Bruno could not bend the infinite back into a box. In Venice, the trap had sprung, and in Rome, the pyre was waiting. Its dry logs piled high for the man who saw too many worlds where the church needed only one. Rome, the eternal city. For centuries, it crowned emperors and buried rebels, blessed kings and burned heretics. By the time Giordano Bruno's chains rattled through its crooked streets in 1593, the city was more fortress than shrine, a citadel for a faith that ruled minds as much as kingdoms. They dragged him past marble saints and half-buried ruins, past the Vatican's gilded halls where popes whispered of Christ's mercy while the Inquisition sharpened its claws in the dark beneath. Bruno's prison was the palace of the Inquisition, the Palazzo del Sant'Uffizio, a fortress of cold corridors, locked doors, iron shackles, and echoing prayers meant to drown out screams. 7 years. That's how long they kept him. 7 winters and summers when the stars he'd called infinite were reduced to a pinhole sky through a barred window. His interrogators came like clockwork. Dominican inquisitors, learned scholars turned prison wardens. They sat behind oak tables piled high with parchment indictments, their quills ready to trap every word. They read out the list of charges, longer than a monastery's scroll of saints. Blasphemy. Denial of key Catholic doctrines. Claiming the universe was infinite. Teaching that stars were suns with their own worlds. Preaching transmigration of souls. The old pagan notion that spirits could drift from body to body, world to world. Mocking the virgin birth. Questioning the Trinity itself. One charge was enough for the stake. Bruno had a dozen. They tried to break him with reason first. Theological debates behind closed doors. Scholars and priests pressed him to explain himself. He met them with fierce logic sharpened by years of wandering libraries and lecture halls. They tried to corner him. Does the sun stand still? He answered, yes, and it burns not just light, but countless other worlds around it. They hissed, does the soul live beyond this earth? He said, why should God's creation stop at one poor speck of dust? Again and again, they demanded he renounce it all. They showed him torture instruments. They whispered rumors of mercy if he would just fold infinity back into Genesis, close the universe, shut the stars inside neat crystalline spheres. But Bruno, the monk who'd fled his cloister, the exile who mocked kings and professors, would not recant. He signed some statements. Yes, he conceded, he'd argued with bad professors, insulted dull priests, but when it came to the heart of his cosmos, he refused to unwrite it. The Inquisition didn't like a stubborn heretic, but they liked a public lesson even more. Bruno's trial dragged on for 7 years, not because they couldn't decide his fate, but because they wanted him to break himself. Year after year, they paraded new witnesses, former students who testified he'd called Christ a magician, Venetian informants who whispered that Bruno spoke of multiple worlds like a second gospel, professors who spat old grudges into official ink. He called us fools, he called Aristotle a jailer of minds, he dared to read the stars without our permission. Through it all, Bruno stood alone, no patron now, no curious king to shield him with courtly favor. His memory tricks could not unlock this door. His universe of infinite worlds shrank to a single, cold cell. The solemn thud of a gavel, the faint weeping of a single witness. In January of 1600, Pope Clement VIII, the last word in a city where heresy was a crime against God and man, ordered the final verdict. The court found Giordano Bruno vehemently suspect of heresy, a polite way of saying, too dangerous to live, too defiant to bend, too loud to forget. They gave him one last chance. Kneel. Confess. Swear that infinity was blasphemy. Bruno looked his judges in the eye and said the words that would outlive any scribe's ink. Perhaps you pronounce this sentence against me with greater fear than I receive it. The court fell silent. The Dominican monk turned philosopher, turned heretic, turned prisoner, would not betray the stars for any mortal mercy. The sentence was death by fire, the ancient, brutal theater where the church made examples of ideas too bright to keep in the dark. They stripped him of his robes, the final humiliation for a man who once wore the white and black of the Dominicans. They handed him over to the secular arm, so the church could keep its hands technically clean while the flames did their holy work. In the Campo dei Fiori, the open-air market where Romans bought bread and wine, a stake was hammered upright, dry wood piled high. The crows circled above, waiting for the hush of a man's final breath. Giordano Bruno, the boy from Nola, the runaway monk who chased infinity, would meet the dawn with his eyes wide open. The Campo dei Fiori, the field of flowers. In better hours, it was a place for gossip and garlic, bread sellers hawking crusty loaves, farmers unloading baskets of cabbages, poets muttering lines under the breath. But on February 17th, 1600, there would be no trade, no laughter, only the creak of rough timbers, the smell of pitch, the whisper of prayers that were equal parts piety and fear. At the center of that square, they raised the stake. They stacked dry wood around it, kindling carefully arranged, thick logs laid crisscross so the flame would catch quick and rise clean. The same people who bought tomatoes and fish here 6 days a week now shuffled in from shadowed alleyways to watch a different kind of theater. Soundscape, a cold breeze, rattling wooden shutters, the soft murmur of a priest reciting final.
The Duke of New York.
They brought Giordano Bruno out of the Inquisition's fortress before dawn, his ankles shackled, wrists bound, a gag forced between his teeth so the crowd wouldn't hear a final curse or a defiant sermon to poison their neat Sunday mass. 7 years in a cell had left his robes thin and his body a ghost of the bold philosopher who once stormed the lecture halls of Paris and Oxford. Yet his eyes, the scribes wrote, burned brighter than the torches that led him through Rome's winding streets. What went through his mind as he was led up to that pyre? Did he remember the boy from Nola, peering at the stars above a small, quiet orchard? Did he hear the echo of professors scoffing at him in Geneva? Did he taste the bitter grin of a Venetian nobleman who had sold him for a chance at salvation? Or did he see only the infinity he had once dared to name? Countless worlds drifting far beyond the reach of any priest's torch, the rustle of dry branches, the hiss of pitch dripping onto stacked logs. Witnesses say he did not beg, he did not weep. Bound to the stake, gagged so no last heresy could spill from his lips, he stood while the executioner made the sign of the cross. Around him, friars prayed for his soul, or so they said. But the truth was they prayed for the minds of the living. Look here. This is what happens when you think too far, speak too loudly, believe too wildly. And then they lit the flame. The crack and snap of dry wood catching, the sudden roar as pitch flares hot, the collective hush of a crowd leaning back from the heat. It must have started as a flicker at his feet, dancing between rough beams, crawling up the stake that pinned him to one last moment on earth. Then the fire found the pitch, the resin, the dry air of a Roman dawn. It climbed his robes, took his flesh, turned a man of words and stars into ash and drifting smoke. No final speech, no final apology. Just flame, hot, merciless, greedy for the body of a mind that refused to bend. They say the fire roared so fierce the wind carried embers into the market stalls nearby. Some vendors crossed themselves, others turned away. A few held their children close, so they would remember the lesson written in flame: speak carefully, think carefully, or follow this man into the fire. When the last timber cracked and fell inward, Bruno's body was already gone, a black husk crumbling into the Campo's old stones. The executioners shoveled what remained into the Tiber River, so no rebel, no student, no secret society could steal a relic, raise a shrine, or dare to make a martyr of a man the church called a fool. They thought they could drown his ashes and scatter his memory. They were wrong, because ideas do not burn as easily as flesh. Infinity does not shrink at the crackle of a pyre. So, next time you look up at a night sky, count the stars if you can. Know that Giordano Bruno died for the belief that what you see is only the beginning, that beyond every star is another sun, another world, another idea, no chain can bind. He stood at the stake not just for astronomy or heresy or pride, but for the dangerous, blazing truth that a mind once opened can never be shut again, no matter how hot the flames. Today, if you stand in the Campo de Fiori, you'll see him. Not a saint, not a king, a bronze figure, hooded, defiant, staring forever toward the Vatican. Giordano Bruno did not live to see telescopes reveal galaxies. He did not live to hear scientists whisper that maybe, just maybe, he was right, that infinity might be real. He died for a truth that could not fit inside a cell. He died because he would not say yes when the world demanded he say no. So next time you look up at the stars, remember the heretic who saw them not as cold points in the sky, but as endless doors to endless worlds. If you learned something tonight, share this story. Subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends that Faces of History doesn't just teach, it burns bright in the dark. I'm the Duke of New York. Stay curious, stay brave, and remember, some flames never go out.